For centuries, knights had dominated European battlefields. These weren't just soldiers. They were walking fortresses wrapped in steel, mounted on animals bred for war, and trained from childhood in the art of killing. A single knight was considered equal to roughly 10 common footmen in battle. Their charge could shatter infantry lines. Their lances could pierce through multiple enemies. And their very presence on the battlefield was enough to send peasant armies fleeing in terror. But here's what the nobles never saw coming. Desperation breeds innovation, and oppression creates unity. The medieval peasant's life was brutal beyond imagination. Bound to the land like slaves, they worked from dawn to dusk just to survive. They paid crushing taxes to lords who saw them as little more than livestock. They watched their children die from diseases that could be easily treated today, lived in hovels shared with animals, and faced starvation whenever crops failed. When you have nothing left to lose, you become dangerous. The first cracks in knightly supremacy appeared in Flanders during the early 1300s. Count Louis IV had pushed his subjects too far with excessive taxation and pro-French policies that threatened their economic survival. In October 1323, what started as scattered rural riots quickly escalated into something unprecedented. An organised peasant rebellion that would dominate Flemish affairs for nearly 5 years. The man who transformed angry farmers into a disciplined army was Nicholas Zannekin, a wealthy peasant farmer who understood that mob fury alone wouldn't defeat trained knights. Under his leadership, the rebels captured major cities including Nieuwpoort, Veurne and Ypres. They didn't just pillage and run, they held territory, administered justice, and proved that common people could govern themselves. But the real test came when they faced knights in open battle. The Battle of the Golden Spurs on July 11th, 1302, would become the most spectacular example of peasants defeating professional cavalry in medieval Europe. King Philip IV of France had assembled a formidable force of 8,000 troops, including 2,500 heavily armoured knights and men-at-arms, to crush the Flemish rebellion. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the cream of French nobility, equipped with the finest weapons and armour money could buy. Facing them were 9,400 Flemish militia members, craftsmen, weavers, merchants, and farmers who had never seen a proper battlefield. By every military calculation of the time, they should have been annihilated. The French knights were organised into 10 formations of 250 armoured horsemen each. Their battle plan was simple and had worked countless times before: soften the enemy with crossbow fire, then unleash a devastating cavalry charge that would shatter the peasant lines like glass. After that, it would be nothing but slaughter. The Flemish had something different in mind. They chose their ground carefully: marshy terrain, cut by streams and ditches that would bog down charging horses. They armed themselves with a unique weapon called the Goedendag, which translates to good day, but was anything but pleasant for those on the receiving end. These were brutal clubs, topped with iron spikes, designed specifically to drag knights from their mounts. When the battle began, everything went according to French expectations. Their crossbowmen pushed back the Flemish missile troops, and their light infantry began breaking through the peasant formations. Victory seemed assured. Then Count Robert, the Second of Artois, made a fatal decision that would echo through history. Rather than allowing his infantry to complete their breakthrough, he pulled them back. Why? Because it would have been dishonourable to deny his noble knights the glory of winning the battle. In medieval thinking, commoners fighting commoners was beneath notice. Only knights could claim true victory. This moment of aristocratic arrogance became the turning point of the entire engagement. As the French cavalry thundered across the marshy ground, their perfectly organised formations began to break apart. Horses stumbled in the soft earth, riders became separated from their units, and what should have been an unstoppable charge became a chaotic melee. The Flemish were ready. Instead of breaking and running as peasants had done in countless previous battles, they held their ground and swarmed the isolated knights. Each armoured warrior suddenly found himself surrounded by as many as 10 enemies, all armed with weapons designed to exploit the gaps in plate armour. What happened next would shatter the myth of knightly invincibility forever. The Goedendag lived up to its name that day, greeting French nobility with iron spikes and wooden clubs. Knights toppled from their mounts like falling towers, their expensive armour becoming death traps as Flemish fighters swarmed over them. The sound of metal against metal rang across the battlefield, punctuated by the screams of war horses and the dying. Within 3 brutal hours, the impossible had happened. Over 70 French lords lay dead in the Flemish mud, their golden spurs torn from their boots as trophies. 500 pairs of these gilded symbols of nobility were collected by the victorious peasants, each one representing a knight who would never again terrorize common folk. Guy of Namur, commanding the Flemish forces, had given a chilling order: kill everyone wearing golden spurs. No mercy, no ransoms, no aristocratic privileges. For once, noble blood was worth no more than peasant blood. The French army collapsed completely. Those knights who survived the initial slaughter fled in panic, abandoning their infantry to be butchered by the vengeful militia. The cream of French nobility had been destroyed by farmers with farm tools. News of the victory spread like wildfire across Europe, sending shockwaves through every royal court and manor house. If Flemish weavers could defeat French knights, what was to stop peasants everywhere from taking up arms? The very foundation of feudal society, the idea that nobles were inherently superior warriors, had been shattered in a single afternoon. But the peasants weren't finished yet. They had learned something crucial from their victory. Organisation and discipline could overcome any advantage in equipment or training. A Bohemian leader named Jan Žižka would take these lessons and create the most feared peasant army in medieval history. Žižka understood that previous peasant rebellions had failed because they relied on mob fury instead of military strategy. He imposed iron discipline on his Hussite forces, making disobedience punishable by death. He trained them to march fast and strike where needed most. Most importantly, he armed them with weapons that could neutralize knightly advantages. The Hussites turned farming tools into instruments of war. Flails used for threshing grain became spiked weapons capable of crushing armor. Pitchforks became pikes that could punch through the finest steel. They even developed the world's first mass-produced military vehicles, war wagons that could be rapidly assembled into mobile fortresses, creating instant defensive positions that cavalry couldn't penetrate. These innovations spread rapidly as peasants across Europe realized they didn't have to accept oppression quietly. The English Peasants Revolt of 1381 saw common folk march on London itself, capturing the Tower and executing the Archbishop of Canterbury. Though ultimately crushed, it permanently ended attempts to reimpose full serfdom in England. The psychological impact was perhaps even more devastating than the military victories. For generations, knights had been seen as divinely appointed warriors, blessed by God with superior fighting ability. The myth of their invincibility had kept millions of peasants in line through fear alone. That fear was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous to the ruling class: hope. Chronicles from the period reveal the terror these victories inspired among the nobility. Jean Froissart wrote of knights burning entire villages in retaliation, desperate to restore their image of invincibility through brutality. But the damage was done. Every peasant now knew that knights could bleed, could fall, could die just like anyone else. The economic implications were staggering. Knights represented massive investments, years of training, expensive equipment, costly war horses. A single knight cost more to maintain than dozens of peasant soldiers. Yet these expensive warriors were being defeated by men armed with farm tools and righteous anger. Military tactics evolved rapidly in response. The age of the mounted knight was ending, replaced by professional armies of disciplined infantry. The battles of Crécy and Agincourt would later cement this transformation as English longbowmen massacred French cavalry with industrial efficiency. But the real revolution wasn't military, it was social. These peasant victories proved that common people could organize, could fight, could govern themselves without noble guidance. The rigid hierarchy of feudalism began to crack under the weight of this revelation. The golden spurs collected at Courtrai became symbols of a new reality. Birth and breeding meant nothing against determination and unity. The descendants of those Flemish militia members would go on to build one of medieval Europe's most prosperous trading regions, their wealth built on commerce rather than conquest. Medieval peasants had done more than fight back against knights. They had fundamentally altered the course of European history. They proved that oppression breeds its own destruction, that even the mightiest fortress can fall to determined siege, and that the true power in any society lies not with those who claim to rule, but with those who choose to resist. The next time you hear about underdogs facing impossible odds, remember the farmers of Flanders standing in their muddy field, watching French cavalry thunder toward them. They had every reason to run, every excuse to surrender. Instead, they stood their ground and changed the world.